Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 5, 6. Just learning about Imago Therapy. It sounds like a therapy that none of you are super familiar with, so I'm hoping that this will be nice and interesting for you. Um, but I decided to just take some chapters out of the Hendrix text around Imago, and let's get to it because we have got quite a few slides to cover. All right. So the first chapter is about the space between, so the interrelational experience between two people. So this chapter is foundational because it explains why Imago therapy intervenes where it does. Rather than beginning with technique, the authors begin with ontology, what kind of universe we live in and what kind of beings we are within it. They argue that psychotherapy historically emerged from a worldview that treated people as separate, bounded individuals, and that this worldview shaped how we conceptualize suffering and treatment. Imago proposes that this worldview is incomplete. If human beings are fundamentally relational, then distress cannot be fully understood or resolved inside a single psyche. This chapter introduces the space between as the primary site of experience, rupture, and repair, setting up the logic for every clinical intervention that follows in this model. The authors describe what we call the space within model, the idea that human experience originates inside the individual. In this framework, therapy is about accessing internal states, memories, beliefs, unconscious material, and reorganizing them through insight. Even relational suffering is treated as something that happens to an individual rather than between individuals. They link this model to Newtonian physics, which imagined reality as composed of discrete, separable objects. Just as atoms were thought to be indivisible and independent, the psychological self was conceptualized as an isolated unit. This metaphor has been enormously productive historically, but the authors argue, there we go, I think I cleared it. But the authors argue it limits our understanding of relational suffering. Clinical experience and neuroscience gradually disrupted the idea of a fixed, self contained psyche. Research on attachment, development, and neuroplasticity demonstrated that human beings are continuously shaped through interaction. The self is not simply influenced by relationships, it emerges through them. This represents a profound paradigm shift. Experience relocates from the private inner world to lived engagement with others. Knowledge about relationships is replaced by embodied participation in them. Imago situates itself firmly in this relational paradigm, asserting that therapy must address interactional processes rather than internal content alone. Across disciplines, the authors note a broader shift from reductionism to holism. Whether in biology, physics, or psychology, complex phenomena are increasingly understood as emerging from systems rather than reducible parts. The idea of a field becomes central, a context that organizes and gives meaning to individual elements. For Imago, this means the couple relationship itself functions as a field. The therapist is not working with two separate psyches, but with a shared relational environment that shapes how each partner feels, thinks, and behaves. Intervention, therefore, involves regulating that field rather than fixing individual pathology. One of the chapter's most critically relevant ideas is the notion that observation is participatory. How we attend to something affects how it unfolds. In relationships, this means that partners are not neutral observers of each other. They are active participants shaping what emerges between them. Imago translates this into a powerful ethical stance. Partners are not blamed for relational distress, but they are invited into responsibility for what they help create. Therapy focuses on altering perception and response patterns so that new relational realities can emerge. The chapter advances a controversial but central claim. Consciousness is not merely a byproduct of the brain, but is expressed through relationships. Drawing from both philosophy and quantum theory, the author suggests that awareness itself is relational in nature. For Imago, this provides the foundation for the idea of a conscious partnership. Self awareness does not develop in isolation, but through mutual recognition. When partners become conscious of each other through structured dialogue and presence, they access a deeper sense of aliveness and connection. The core Imago claim is that connecting is not something we do, it is what we are. Connection does not mean connections, or I'm sorry, disconnection does not mean connection ceases to exist. It means awareness of connection is lost. This reframing is crucial clinically because it positions therapy as restoring awareness rather than creating something new. Rupture in relationship activates survival responses that narrow perception and intensify self protection. Imago therapy aims to reverse this process by reestablishing safety, allowing awareness of connection to return. Borrowing from Martin Buber's, I think it's Buber, Buber, I thou philosophy, Imago conceptualizes the space between as a real entity created through interaction. The relationship is not simply the sum of two individuals, it is a third presence with its own emotional and energetic qualities. This space can be filled with appreciation, safety, and curiosity, or with criticism, anxiety, and withdrawal. Therapy focuses on shaping the quality of this space because changes here reverberate into each partner's internal world. Imago explicitly locates problems in interaction rather than inside individuals. This does not deny internal suffering, but it reframes its origin. Distress arises from repeated negative exchanges that disrupt connection and safety. Therefore, therapeutic change must be initiated in the same place through new interactional experiences. When interactions become coherent and safe, internal states reorganize naturally. The authors describe a continuous oscillation between the space between and the space within. Life is lived relationally and remembered internally. While influence flows both ways, Imago emphasizes that change begins in interaction. New relational experiences populate memory with different emotional configurations, which then influence future interactions. Therapy works by interrupting old cycles and establishing new relational rhythms. In contrast to traditional notions of a stable self, Imago describes the self as a dynamic process, responsive to context and continuously changing. The quantum self has no fixed essence independent of relationships. Clinically, this means identity is malleable. Who someone becomes in relationship depends on the quality of the relational environment. This offers both hope and responsibility in therapeutic work. From this perspective, a couple is not two selves negotiating proximity, it is an emergent system. Each partner shapes and is shaped by the other continuously. The relationship itself becomes a unit of analysis. This challenge models the this challenges models that prioritize individual differentiation over connection. Imago does not reject individuality, but situates it within relational interdependence. Suffering in Imago is fundamentally the pain of disconnection. When relational safety is lost, the nervous system shifts into survival mode. Reactivity replaces curiosity, and partners lose access to empathy and playfulness. This suffering is not pathological, it is universal. Couples come to therapy not because something is wrong with them, but because they want to recover their natural state of connection. The Imago therapist does not stand outside the system, they participate in the space between, influencing its tone and safety. Their presence, pacing, and interventions shape the relational environment directly. This requires a high degree of self regulation and intentionality. The therapist models coherence and containment so the couple can borrow it. The chapter closes by outlining the conditions necessary for restoring connection. Safety comes first. Without it, no transformation is possible. Empathy allows partners to see beyond defenses, while regulation keeps the nervous system engaged but not overwhelmed. Imago dialogue becomes a primary mechanism for achieving these conditions, providing a structured way to reshape the space between. So, this chapter is not about how to do imago therapy, it's about why it works the way it does. By grounding intervention in a relational ontology, Imago offers a coherent framework linking theory, technique, and transformation. As clinicians, this challenges us to stop asking only what's happening inside our clients and begin asking what's happening between them and how we are participating in shaping that space. All right, so now moving on to chapter 3 and talking about the brain. So, this chapter is essentially saying if you want to understand couplehood, you can't ignore neurobiology. The author's basic premise is straightforward and clinically intuitive. Our brains are shaped in early relational environments, and those relationally shaped brains show up most intensely in intimate partnerships. When partners trigger each other, they're not merely having a communication problem, they're often activating survival circuitry and implicit relational memory. The hopeful frame is neuroplasticity. If relationships help wire the brain in the first place, relationships can also help rewire it. For Imago, that becomes the clinical mission. Create the safety and structure necessary for partners to stay in the higher brain long enough to build new experiences of connection that become new neural patterns. The chapter starts by reminding us that neuroscience is not purely objective, it's embedded in culture. What we believe about the brain reflects the tools and metaphors of the time. For centuries, thought was located in the heart. Later, the brain became associated with disease, reason, spirit, or survival, depending on cultural priorities and intellectual movements. The metaphor progression matters clinically because metaphors shape how clients understand themselves. If the brain is a machine, then we fix it. If it's a computer, we reprogram it. If it's a social organ, we treat it as relationally regulated. The authors are preparing us to adopt the last stance. The brain is embodied and social. An intimate relationship is one of its primary organizing contexts. Here they address the triune brain model because it's still popular in clinical training. McLean offered a clean story, a primitive motor brain, a limbic emotional brain, man, and a neocortical thinking brain. The problem is that contemporary neuroscience sees this as too modular and hierarchical. Functions are more distributed, systems overlap, and networks matter. Clinically, though, we often keep a simplified map because it helps couples understand what's happening in conflict. So you might say something like, my threat system took over. I lost access to reflective thinking. So the tension here is we can use simplified models as teaching tools while staying honest about their limits. Imago's move is to retrain a three-part structure, but emphasize integration and network functioning rather than rigid compartments. The chapter aligns with modern neuroscience in emphasizing distributed functioning. Emotion is not simply in one location, cognition is not isolated in another. What matters is a coordination and integration across networks. This matters in couples therapy because conflict is often an integration failure. One system hijacks the whole, and the couple loses access to nuance, empathy, and self reflection. Plasticity is a doorway to clinical hope. The brain is not fixed, it is continually shaped by experience, especially relational experience. That means the relationship itself is a training ground, either reinforcing threat based wiring or building connectivity-based wiring. Imago's techniques are designed to create experience that repeatedly recruit the networks associated with safety, attunement, and reflective function. Sorry, y'all. Just sick trying to lecture here. The key contribution here is the insistence that the brain is not a floating cognitive organ, it's embedded in the body. Partners experience relational events as bodily events. The example of kicked in the stomach after a divorce announcement, captures what couples already know. The relational threat is processed as somatic threat. This is clinically significant because many couples think conflict is about content, but neurobiologically, the earliest shift happens in the body with things such as heart rate, breath, muscle tension, facial tone, and vagal state. If we only intervene cognitively, we often miss the primary driver. Imago's emphasis on slowing down and restructuring exchange is, in part, a physiological intervention, keeping bodies regulated enough for the context, or I'm sorry, for the cortex to stay online. I don't even have anything to blow out of my nose. Okay. Just give you a second to look at this slide while I get a cough drop. All right. Although they critique rigid triune thinking, the authors still teach a three-part structure because it helps couples locate their lived experience. Like they can say things like, I can feel myself drop into survival mode, or I can't think straight when we fight. The clinical point is not anatomical precision, it's functional awareness. What matters most is integration, how well these systems coordinate under stress. When integration is low, couples become reactive. They interpret each other as threats. They lose their ability to mentalize. When integration is high, they can feel strong emotion and still remain reflective, empathic, and intentional. Imago therapy is essentially a method for increasing integration in the relational context. The lower brain is described as the foundation of survival, respiration, heart rate, and blood pressure. These are functions we do not choose. The key idea is that this system is always scanning, always prioritizing safety, and it does not wait for conscious deliberation. This is why couples can become flooded and reactive so quickly. In conflict, partners often feel shocked by what they said or did. This chapter frames that as a predictable outcome of threat circuitry leading the moment. Imago's stance is not try harder to communicate. It's learn to recognize survival activation early and shift into processes that restore safety. All right, we're going to try to resume here. Okay, so the lower brain is described as the foundation of survival. Things like respiration, heart rate, and blood pressure. These are functions we do not choose. The key idea is that this system is always scanning, always prioritizing safety, and it does not wait for conscious deliberation. I feel like I've already said this. Did I repeat this slide already? Yep. So JK, let's move to the next one. Okay. So the RAS acts, so it's the reticular activating system. It acts like a gatekeeper deciding what gets into awareness. Couples can find this validating. Like they might think something like, I'm not crazy. My system is filtering for threat. In intimate partnership, cues from the beloved carry disproportionate weight. Tone of voice, facial expression, delayed response. These can be tagged as urgent and dangerous. Clinically, this helps us explain why the argument is rarely about the dishes. The dishes are the stimulus. The nervous system is responding to a perceived threat to connection, belonging, and safety. Imago uses structured dialogue to reduce ambiguity and soften cues so the gatekeeper stops treating the partner like a threat. This is the classic low road, high road idea. The amygdala receives information quickly and can trigger alarm before the cortex has time to interpret context. That means partners can feel certain they're in danger before they can articulate why. When the cortex often becomes a lawyer, then the cortex often becomes a lawyer defending the alarm rather than a judge evaluating reality. In couple work, this shows up as rigid, rapid escalation and certainty, things like you always, you never. So, imago interventions slow down the exchange to give the slower pathways a chance. Mirroring and validation are not just communication skills, they are neural pacing tools that support cortical involvement. The authors elevate anxiety as the most important sensation because it signals threat. And in intimate relationships, threat is not only physical, it's relational. The nervous system can treat the possibility of rejection, abandonment, or humiliation as existential danger. Clinically, this is one reason couples fight so hard. They are not merely debating, they are defending against the felt possibility of disconnection. Imago's emphasis on safety, containment, and non judgment is designed to reduce anxiety so partners can re enter connection rather than escalate defenses. The limbic system is framed as the engine room of emotion and relational memory. The hippocampus helps encode experiences into longer term memory. The amygdala flags what is emotionally significant and what needs urgent response. Importantly, couples often relive old relational realities through implicit memory without knowing it. That's why conflict can feel disproportionate. A present day irritation becomes fused with a long history of hurt. Partners may be responding to their spouse and to the emotional residue of earlier attachment experiences. Imago will later leverage this by connecting reactivity to developmental history, not to blame parents, but to make the present intelligible. The chapter emphasizes that the old brain is binary. It does not do nuance well when activated. This maps onto how couples talk in escalation. They say things like, you don't care, you're against me, I'm alone. The nervous system has moved into a friend or foe categorization. The key clinical piece is that perception is what matters. Even when there's no objective danger, the body responds as if there is. This is why reassurance often fails. Once the system is mobilized, the partner's words may not register as safe. Imago tries to change the channel from threat signaling to safety signaling through structured attunement. This section makes the relational point in physiological terms. The same systems that keep us alive also govern how we attach and relate. The ventral vagal system supports facial expressiveness, vocal prosody, prosody, and the capacity to stay present. When it's online, couples can be engaged even in disagreement. When danger is perceived, sympathetic activation mobilizes fight flight, or dorsal vagal activation produces shutdown. Couples often have pattern differences here. One escalates, the other collapses or withdraws. Imago is fundamentally trying to keep partners within a ventral vagal window long enough to do repair. This is one of the most clinically actionable points. Safety is not a luxury, it is a precondition for everything else. Without safety, the brain cannot reliably access the upper cortical functions required for empathy, curiosity, reflection, and collaboration. Imago's insistence on structured dialogue, turn taking, and non judgment is not about politeness. It is a neurobiological strategy. The therapist becomes responsible for engineering conditions that reduce threat cues and increase signals of attunement so the couple can do the work that would otherwise be neurophysiologically unavailable. The cortex is described as the crown jewels because it enables complex meaning making and self reflection. It can hold nuance, so things like I'm upset and I still love you. It can choose delay or impulse. It can mentalize, so something like your withdrawal might be fear, not contempt. But the cortex cannot do its job when the lower systems hijack the moment. So the clinical target becomes integration. Imago's interventions create a scaffold for cortical engagement, slowing down, structuring interaction, and repeatedly practicing empathy building moves until they become more automatic. The chapter states that reactivity is universal. When emotional arousal spikes, the lower brain leads and the cortex becomes secondary. This explains why partners can say outrageous things they later regret. The system is optimized for survival, not intimacy. The clinically important reframe is that couples presenting problem often reflects a brain state problem, dysregulation and low integration, more than a compatibility problem. That doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it changes how we intervene. We prioritize regulation, pacing, and safety so the couple can access different capacities. This is one of the most clinically resonant points. When the old brain is activated, it can't reliably tell the difference between now and then. This is why an argument with a partner can feel like a replay of childhood, because in a sense, it is. Implicit memories are activated as present reality. For couples, this explains why the intensity feels irrational. Something small lands as massive because it is linked to older experiences of not feeling seen, not being safe, or not being worthy. Imago will later position the partner as both the activator of old wounds and, paradoxically, the potential healer through new relational experiences. The chapter pivots here toward hope. Yes, we are bound by survival instincts, but we also have uniquely human capacities for reflection and choice. We can notice ourselves, we can pause, we can breathe, we can reframe, we can decide not to escalate. This is where Imago's structured practices become empowerment tools. They are not merely communication skills, they train attention and cultivate choices that interrupt automatic survival loops. Over time, those choices shape the brain. The key idea is repeated practice in the presence of partner builds new neural pathways for staying connected under stress. This section makes the clinical point vivid. Our nervous systems are designed to read each other. Facial expression, voice tone, and subtle shifts in affect are not soft variables, they are primary safety signals. The system is scanning constantly and answering one question: am I safe with you? When attunement is present, the ventral vagal system supports calm connection. When attunement is ruptured, defensive patterns emerge. Couples often misinterpret each other's cues. One partner's flat tone may be shut down rather than contempt, but it lands as danger and triggers escalation. Imago therapy is, in part, a method for restoring reliable safety cues through slowed pacing, clear structure, and explicit empathy. Here, the authors explicitly frame mind as an energy information process and the brain as continuously shaped by interaction. Each relational exchange leaves traces, some small, some profound. And because the brain develops in layers, early experiences carry disproportionate weight. This is why early caregiving matters so much. The foundational patterns of safety, trust, and expectation are laid down before language. Couples later argue with words, but the deepest part of the argument is often pre-verbal. Are you there for me? Am I safe with you? Do I matter? The author's developmental claim is clear. We learn love by living it. Our capacity to give warmth, reliability, and care is shaped by whether we received these. That doesn't mean people can't grow beyond their histories, but it does mean partners bring different starting templates. Adult pair bonding becomes the arena where these templates are activated most strongly. That's why romantic partnership is both exquisitely painful and uniquely transformative. Imago treats this not as misfortune, but as the pathway. Intimacy reveals the pattern, and structured intimacy can also rewire it. This is where the chapter becomes openly cultural and philosophical. They argue that Western individualism misreads human nature. We are not isolated units who choose to relate. We are relational beings whose survival and flourishing depend on connection. Whether we fully agree or not, clinically this is meaningful. Couples suffer when disconnection feels like a tear in existence. That's why I don't care or I'm leaving can land as annihilation. Imago uses this to normalize the intensity of couple conflict while still holding partners accountable for how they manage it. The soft clay metaphor is clinically useful. It conveys that the brain holds the imprint of relational touch, every hand that shaped it. This is why repeated patterns become automatic and why change requires repeated new experiences. Imago positions the relationship as the arena for rewiring. If partners repeatedly experience being heard, validated, and responded to, the brain begins to update its expectations. Over time, the couple becomes a secure base rather than a threat generator. The chapter ends with a sweeping narrative. Our original condition is connection, aliveness, joy, and wonder. When early presence is sustained, those states remain more accessible. When presence is ruptured, anxiety becomes central and people develop protective strategies, sometimes anger, sometimes depression, sometimes withdrawal. This framing sets up the next chapter on developmental challenges and ruptured connecting. Clinically, it also gives couples a compassionate lens. Reactivity is often protective against terror, not evidence of malice. The work becomes helping partners feel safe enough to let protective strategies soften. So, if we translate this chapter into practice, we become state trackers. We notice when a partner's eyes change, voice tightens, breath shortens, or body collapses. We name the shift without shaming. Something just changed in your system. Can we slow down? We structure the interaction to reduce threat cues. We treat tone and pacing as interventions, not extras. And we focus on repair as a neuroplastic engine. Every successful repair teaches the nervous system something like we can survive rupture and return. So, some tensions to hold. First, neuroscience can become a persuasive story that feels mechanistic and true, but we still need humility. The chapter itself admits consciousness and subjective experience remain deeply mysterious. Secondly, there is a risk of reducing relational harm to hijacks, which could inadvertently minimize accountability. We want both compassion for survival responses and responsibility for behavior. Third, the chapter embeds a cultural critique of individualism. That may resonate, but it's also a value stance. Finally, triune like teaching models are heuristics, helpful for clients, but not the whole truth. The clinical question is always, does this framing increase safety, responsibility, and repair, or does it provide a loophole? So this chapter sets the foundation for why Imago uses structured dialogue and why safety is non-negotiable. If conflict is fundamentally a threat state problem layered with implicit memory, then insight alone won't be enough. Couples need new experiences, slow, safe, repeated experiences that keep the cortex online and allow partners to feel felt. Imago's optimism is that the very relationship that triggers old pain can also become the mechanism of healing. That is the arc we're moving into next, developmental, rupture, and the pathway back to conscious partnership. All right. So moving to chapter 6, the search for original connecting. So, this chapter answers one of the most common questions couples ask, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly. Why do I keep ending up here? The Imago model begins with a radical premise. The present is not actually the present as we experience it, because the brain has no context other than the past. What we call now is always memory reporting on itself. This matters clinically because couples believe they are reacting to each other in real time, when in fact, they are responding to a convergence of present day interaction and deeply embedded developmental memory. Imago theory offers a framework for understanding how this memory becomes the organizing force behind partner selection, conflict, and drive toward transformation. The authors make a careful distinction here. Psychology accepts that the past influences the present, but Imago goes further. The past recreates itself in the present. This is not because humans are masochistic or stuck, but because the brain has no alternative blueprint. Memory is a bridge that brings the past forward as lived reality. Clinically, this reframes repetition. Couples are not repeating pain for its own sake. They are repeating because survival depends on completing something unfinished. The repetition is purposeful. It is an attempt at resolution, not a failure of willpower or insight. Imago is both a concept and a system. As a concept, it refers to the constellation of emotionally charged memories formed in childhood. As a system, it explains how these memories guide adult relational life. The imago is not a literal record of what happened, it is an internalized emotional map of how it felt to be with our caretaker. This distinction is crucial. The imago is subjective. Two siblings raised in the same household can develop radically different imagos because they experience their caretakers differently. What drives adult attraction is not historical truth, but emotional resonance. The authors describe the imago as an internal photo album, a chronological collage of moments that shaped our understanding of love and safety. These images accumulate across developmental stages and tell a story about what we learn to expect from others. If the story is largely positive, it repeats easily. If it is painful or incomplete, it presents itself again in adulthood in search of revision. This is where Imago departs from Freud. Repetition is not about reenacting trauma, it is about trying to change its outcome. Imago reframes repetition as intelligent and future oriented. The psyche is not stuck, it is striving. The goal is not to suffer again, but to finally experience a different outcome, one that restores connecting and allows development to resume. This is where imagination enters. When we move from repetition to reflection, we gain the possibility of novelty. And novelty, once lived, becomes a new past, one that can be uploaded into the future. This is the creative engine of transformation. Falling in love is not random. It is the moment that the imago identifies someone who appears capable of meeting an unmet developmental need. The experience is euphoric because it temporarily restores original connecting, the sensation of aliveness, joy, and safety. Clinically, this helps couples understand why romantic love feels so essential and so consuming. It is not merely pleasure, it is hope. Hope that what was missing in childhood can finally be fulfilled. When a developmental need is unmet, progress stalls. That stall affects everything that comes after it. The psyche remains oriented toward completing the task, even decades later. The need itself is universal to restore connecting, but the way it presents is specific to the stage where development was interrupted. This is why adult conflict often feels disproportionate. A present day interaction is standing in for something much older. The imago becomes the filter that selects a partner capable of reactivating that unfinished agenda. The imago is not logical, it is precise. It does not search for someone healthy in the abstract. It searches for someone familiar in the deepest emotional sense. Familiarity signals possibility. This person resembles the one with whom repair is still possible. This is the central paradox of Imago. We are drawn to partners who are similar to those who hurt us, not because we want to suffer again, but because the psyche believes this is where completion can finally occur. Because the Imago is based on imperfect caretaking, the partner selected through it will inevitably fail us, just as our caretakers did. This failure is not malicious, it is structural. The partner does not have what we are demanding because we never received it. Because they never received it themselves. When this happens, survival anxiety is triggered. The same fear that arose in childhood resurfaces, and we respond using the same strategies we learned early on. This is the beginning of the power struggle. When the partner does not meet the unmet need, protest emerges. The protest is unconscious and survival driven. Some partners escalate, being demanding, pursuing, or confronting. Others minimize by withdrawing, shutting down, and disappearing. If protests fail, the strategies intensify. What began as a hopeful attempt to repair becomes a struggle for survival. The relationship turns into the stage on which childhood defenses are reenacted. A crucial clinical warning appears here. If we fail to help couples meet their unconscious agenda, we will be pulled into it. Clients may protest, disengage, or leave therapy just as they did in childhood when needs were not met. This means therapists must understand why the couple is here, not just what they say is wrong. The task is not to fix behavior, but to help partners become conscious collaborators in satisfying developmental needs in a new way. The chapter now shifts from theory to specificity, outlining the defining characteristics of the imago. Understanding these features gives therapists a roadmap for assessment and intervention. What matters most is that the imago is not static. It can change with new experience, but it does not disappear on its own. Imago theory privileges experience over fact. What matters is not the caretaker's intended or even what objectively occurred, but how safe, loved, and seen the child felt. This helps clinicians avoid getting lost in factual debates about childhood and instead focus on emotional resonance, the true driver of adult relational patterns. The imago can evolve. Positive relationships later in life can mitigate early wounds. But because early experiences carry more weight, the first draft of the imago tends to dominate unless consciously revised. This explains why insight alone often fails. Perception persists even when contradicted by evidence. Change requires lived relational experience. Many clients deny childhood pain, especially when that pain was severe. The more intense the deprivation, the stronger the defense against remembering it. Yet the imago continues to operate regardless of awareness. Therapists must approach this gently. The goal is not excavation for its own sake, but helping clients see how old patterns are shaping present dynamics. An imago match is not accidental. Partners match across multiple dimensions: emotional, developmental, defensive, and functional. They are equally wounded, though differently expressed. This matching creates intensity. Each partner activates the other's deepest vulnerabilities while simultaneously holding the missing pieces the other needs for wholeness. The turtle hailstorm metaphor captures a dynamic vividly. The more one partner escalates, the more the other withdraws. Each response intensifies the other. Neither style is wrong, both are survival adaptations. The work is not to eliminate difference, but to create safety so neither defense needs to dominate. Under threat, partners regress. They may appear wildly different in style, but they are often arrested at similar developmental levels. Both are responding from the same unresolved place. This reframes one is immature narratives. In Imago, both partners are equally stuck, just differently defended. Children learn which functions are safe to express. When expression is punished, the function is repressed, not eliminated. Over time, it becomes part of the lost self. In adulthood, we partner with someone who expresses what we repress. We criticize them for it, yet need them for it. This is one of the deepest paradoxes in intimate love. At this point in the chapter, Imago offers a deceptively simple but profoundly organizing framework. All intimate relationships move through three stages, not because couples are flawed, incompatible, or unlucky, but because biology and development demand it. These stages are not choices, they are processes. Couples don't opt into them and they don't skip them through insight or goodwill. The first stage, romantic love, is fueled by novelty and neurochemistry. It restores temporarily the felt sense of original connecting, aliveness, joy, wonder, and safety. The second stage, the power struggle, emerges when differences can no longer be denied. As novelty fades and reality sets in, the survival brain becomes dominant, and the couple enters a period of reactivity, protest, and defense. The third stage represents a fork in the road. Couples either adapt unconsciously through fighting, distancing, or leaving, or they grow consciously by developing new relational capacities. What is crucial for clinicians to emphasize is that this sequence is biologically and developmentally driven. Couples often believe something has gone wrong when they enter the power struggle, when in fact it's something necessary has begun. The task of therapy is not to return couples to the romantic stage, but to help them move through the power struggle toward a more mature form of love. Romantic love is among the most intoxicating experiences humans have, and Imago treats it with reverence rather than dismissal. This stage is powerful precisely because it temporarily restores our original condition of connecting. Partners feel alive, seen, essential, and fused with one another. Time collapses, differences disappear. The world feels coherent again. Neurochemically, this experience is supported by a surge of dopamine, PEA, endorphins, adrenaline, and pheromones. Cognitively and emotionally, partners feel obsessed, energized, and unusually generous. This is why people in love will drive hours to see one another, sleep very little, spend money freely, and overlook glaring incompatibilities. The brain is not malfunctioning here, it is performing exactly as designed. But romantic love is not meant to last indefinitely. It is a state, not a structure. Its purpose is to bond two people long enough for deeper development work to begin. Clinically, this matters because couples often come to therapy mourning the loss of romance, assuming its disappearance means the relationship is broken. Imago reframes this loss as the necessary end of illusion and the beginning of growth. The power struggle begins when difference intrudes on the illusion of sameness. This moment can be subtle or dramatic, but it is inevitable. Partners begin to notice that the person they fell in love with does not think, feel, prioritize, or respond the way they assumed. And because romantic love equated sameness with safety, difference now registers as danger. At this stage, the survival brain takes over. Cortisol replaces endorphins, anxiety replaces wonder, partners shift from curiosity to self protection. What Imago insists on, and this is a radical clinical reframe, is that conflict at this stage is not evidence of failure. It is evidence that development is attempting to resume. Imago defines conflict as growth trying to happen. The psyche is pushing the couple out of symbiosis and toward differentiation. The tragedy is not the power struggle itself, but that most couples lack the relational skills to navigate it consciously. Without guidance, they interpret pain as proof they chose the wrong partner rather than as a signal that something essential is unfolding. When couples enter the power struggle, they must adapt. And most adaptations are defensive rather than developmental. Imago identifies four common outcomes. The first is the hot relationship, where partners stay intensely engaged but through chronic conflict. Energy remains in the relationship, but it is largely negative. These couples fight loudly, repeatedly, and exhaustingly, often followed by brief moments of relief or closeness that keep the cycle alive. The second outcome is the parallel relationship. Here, partners avoid conflict by disengaging emotionally. They coexist rather than relate. They may function well on the surface, raising children, managing finances, but there is little shared inner life. Intimacy is sacred for stability. The third outcome is the invisible divorce, where partners remain psychologically entangled but emotionally or behaviorally exit the relationship through affairs, addiction, work, or serial separations. Pain continues without resolution. The fourth option, and the one that Imago advocates, is conscious partnership. This path requires intentional effort, skill acquisition, and a willingness to face difference without annihilating it. Hmm. Importantly, couples do not stumble into conscious partnership. They must be taught how to build it. The extensive list of features in this chapter describes what Imago calls an unconscious relationship. At its core, such a relationship is organized through anxiety. Partners are driven not by love, but by fear: fear of loss, fear of difference, fear of annihilation. Anger and depression serve as masks for this anxiety, allowing partners to defend without feeling the terror underneath. In unconscious relating, each partner assumes their perception is reality. Difference is experienced as threat, not information. The other becomes an object, either something to be used to meet needs or something to be neutralized to remove danger. Engagement oscillates between escalation and withdrawal, merger and polarization. Perhaps most paradoxically, unconscious partners complain bitterly about the lack of intimacy while simultaneously avoiding it. True intimacy would require vulnerability, presence, and mutual recognition, conditions that feel intolerably risky given their early experiences of ruptured connecting. The relationship becomes reactive rather than intentional, survival based rather than growth oriented. This chapter begins the Imago model, or I'm sorry, this chapter brings the Imago model into full focus. The core human problem is ruptured connecting in childhood, and the core human drive is the restoration of that connecting. Because survival is at stake, the psyche selects an adult partner who unconsciously resembles the caretaker with whom the rupture occurred, initially initiating the Imago cycle. Romantic love opens the door by temporarily restoring connection. The power struggle emerges when when illusion collapses and difference asserts itself. At that point, couples face a choice: adapt unconsciously and remain stuck in survival based relating, or grow consciously by developing skills required for mature love. The remainder of this book and the heart of Imago Therapy addresses the fourth option. The next chapter introduces conscious partnership, what it looks like and how it differs from unconscious relating, and how couples can intentionally cultivate it. This is where hope becomes practice and theory becomes transformation. All right, so the Imago dialogue or intentional dialogue. This chapter makes a bold claim. Most couples do not actually have a communication problem, they have a structure problem. What they call talking things through is often a series of parallel monologues that intensify threat rather than resolve it. Imago does not begin by teaching couples to express themselves better. It begins by fundamentally changing the position from which partners speak and listen. Dialogue is not simply a technique, it is a primary mechanism through which safety, differentiation, and reconnection are restored. So, monologue and dialogue is differentiated here, where monologue is vertical, one-way truth owning, very different from a dialogue. This is what Imago Therapy um, is trying to encourage and what the intentional dialogue offers. So, dialogue is horizontal, it's mutual, it's relational, it opens understanding, it lowers defenses. Monologue escalates threat, and dialogue creates transparency through things like empathy and understanding. So the authors situate monologue historically. For most of human history, relationships are organized hierarchically: parent over child, ruler over subject, priest over parishioner. Monologue made sense in those contexts, but modern intimate partnerships are expected to be egalitarian while still using a vertical communication structure. That mismatch generates anxiety, conflict, and power struggles. Imago dialogue emerges as a language suitable for egalitarian relational partnerships. So, again, drawing from Buber's I Thou philosophy, Rogers' empathic listening, and Sullivan's interpersonal theory, Imago dialogue reflects a relational paradigm. Dialogue is not about persuading or solving problems, it is about allowing the interior world of one person to be fully known by another. When this happens without judgment, both partners are changed. Agreement may follow, but it is a byproduct of connection, not the goal. So the table contrasting reactive monologue and imago dialogue captures a crucial distinction. Reactive conversations happen impulsively, driven by affect and survival responses. Dialogue is intentional and bounded. Importantly, dialogue increases differentiation rather than fusion. Partners feel closer because they are more distinct, not because they collapse into sameness. One of the most striking claims in this chapter is that talking, especially under threat, is the most dangerous thing couples do. Listening, on the other hand, is rare and profoundly regulating. The simple act of taking turns, speaking and listening dramatically lowers emotional intensity. This is not because couples suddenly agree, but because their nervous system begins to experience safety. So Imago makes clear that what couples talk about matters far less than how safe the interaction feels. When safety is present, couples can discuss finances, sex, parenting, or trauma without escalation. When safety is absent, even neutral topics polarize. Dialogue is designed to regulate safety first, meaning making follows. So, imago dialogue, again, or intentional dialogue, is structured and sequential. Each step builds on the previous one. Mirroring ensures accuracy and presence. Validation affirms the logic of the other's experience without agreement. Empathy attunes to emotional reality. Skipping steps undermines safety. Together, these steps replace reactivity with intentional responding. Mirroring is the foundation of dialogue. The receiver reflects back what the sender said, checking for accuracy and inviting more. This interrupts the habitual impulse to rebut or reinterpret. Mirroring meets a deep human need, what Kohut called mirror hunger. Mirror hunger. Feeling accurately reflected signals worth, presence, and importance. Mirroring does more than convey information. It repairs early relational injuries where caregivers were unavailable, dismissive, or intrusive. Neurologically, accurate mirroring calms the limbic system and engages integration across brain regions. For many clients, this is the first time they have ever fully felt heard. Validation is often the hardest step. It requires the receiver to temporarily suspend their own perspective and enter the other's worldview. Validation does not mean conceding or agreeing. It means acknowledging that the other person's experience is coherent given their history and position. This step dismantles symbiotic thinking and allows difference without threat. Empathy moves from understanding to resonance. The receiver imagines and reflects the emotional experience of the sender, checking for accuracy. Importantly, empathy is not sympathy. It is not how I would feel, but how you feel. This step restores connecting at the affective level and often leads to profound softening. Imago dialogue is neurologically elegant. Its structure engages the prefrontal cortex, quiets the amygdala, and supports hemispheric integration. The sequence from mirroring to empathy mirrors the brain's movement from cognition to affect. Over time, couples develop greater emotional regulation and presence, both inside and outside sessions. Sentence stems often feel awkward or artificial at first, and couples frequently resist them. Imago frames this as no different from learning any complex skill. Structure precedes freedom. With practice, dialogue becomes fluid, natural, and internalized. Eventually, couples become dialogical even outside the formal three-step process. So, at its deepest level, Imago dialogue transforms relational structure itself. It relocates partners from past-driven reactivity into present moment awareness. Power shifts from power over to power with. This transformation allows partners to encounter each other as real, distinct, and safe, often for the first time. Dialogue not only repairs the rupture in the present relationship, it also repairs earlier ruptures from childhood. Through repeated experiences of feeling seen, validated, and felt, partners internalize new relational templates. The partner becomes a safe witness rather than a threat, allowing old wounds to reorganize. The outcomes of dialogue are both immediate and cumulative. Couples experience greater safety, reduced negativity, and deeper intimacy. Over time, differentiation increases alongside closeness. Curiosity replaces criticism, and conflict becomes workable rather than catastrophic. Imago dialogue is ultimately more than a clinical intervention. It is the language of conscious partnership. When couples speak dialogically, they embody a relational worldview, one that privileges mutuality, presence, and shared meaning. In this sense, the work of the Imago therapist extends beyond the couple to the collective. Dialogue becomes both personal healing and social evolution. All right, chapter 10. So, how you facilitate connecting. This is about your stance, how we orient to couples, because the stance quietly shapes everything: what we ask, what we notice, what we interpret, and what we reinforce. The chapters argue that none of us see clients objectively. We and they inevitably interpret experience through personal, psychological, and cultural assumptions. Imago treats this as unavoidable and therefore something we must become conscious of. In this frame, couples therapy is fundamentally a dialogical process facilitated by the therapist. We are not primarily solving problems, we are structuring the space between so connecting can be restored. The chapter is blunt. Meta theory is not abstract, it's the most concrete part of clinical work. Your worldview determines whether you position partners side by side or face to face, whether you start with history, skills, diagnosis, or future vision, and what you count as progress. We always have a theory of human nature and change operating in the background, even if we've never named it. Imago's invitation is have a theory, but hold it lightly, because real clinical work should keep updating our assumptions when reality doesn't match them. A core message here is that perception is interpretive by nature. Social psychology calls it naive realism, the belief that we see objectively and anyone who disagrees must be irrational or biased. Imago links that to symbiotic consciousness. When connecting ruptures in childhood, anxiety and self-absorption intensify the conviction that my view is the truth. Clinically, that means our job includes modeling epistemic humility, checking perceptions, avoiding rigid certainty, and helping couples become less absolute about their conclusions about each other. So, this chapter uses a simple but powerful point. How you start therapy strongly influences how it ends. Some therapists begin with diagnostic clues, compatibility variables, or presenting problems. Others begin with family of origin narratives. Others immediately observe interaction and around a hot topic. Imago often begins with the future, what the couple wants and what their dream relationship looks like, because hope and vision can soften defensiveness and create energy for structure. Then Imago circles back to the past and current problem as needed, but the direction stays relational and future facing. The chapter invites therapists to name their meta theory across four domains. First, what do you believe about the nature of the universe, separate objects, or an interconnected field? Second, what do you believe about human nature? Is it a stable essence or ongoing change shaped by context and choice? Third, what causes suffering and why do relationships fall apart? Fourth, what is a thriving relationship and how is it created? Imago frames these not as philosophical extras, but as the operating system underneath your clinical decisions. Imago makes a strong claim. Connecting is not just nice, it's essential, almost ontological. The central human problem is ruptured connecting, and relationship becomes the location where that rupture can be restored. The science of Imago therapy is the consistent view that the tools, especially Imago dialogue, create connections, or I'm sorry, create conditions where partners can experience safety, differentiation, and reconnection. The method is less about interpreting content and more about repeatedly shaping the field until the couple can do it themselves. Imago distinguishes science from art. The orientation stays stable, but the therapist must respond to cues in real time. Sometimes couples are on best behavior and the real material appears later. Therapist's job is to gather fragments, things like childhood challenges, defensive styles, and maturity levels, into a coherent picture that guides pacing and intervention. It's less row the boat in a straight line and more navigate rapids with responsiveness. So, this slide is talking about the posture that Imago has toward couples. We interpret reactive behavior as an attempt to regulate anxiety rooted in earlier ruptures, not as evidence of bad character. We assume both partners long for connection and also fear the vulnerability required to restore it. Importantly, Imago treats the couple as already bringing the raw material needed to begin. What's missing is structure, safety, and a facilitated process. So when couples say we're not connecting, Imago hears a longing stated as a complaint. A practical relational idea here is holding hope. In high reactivity, couples can't access hope. An Imago therapist may hold it for them without shaming them for not being able to. The chapter also frames repair as taking turns. Sometimes one partner can catch themselves first and initiate dialogue, like offering a mirror rather than escalating. Next time, roles may reverse. Over time, couples internalize that someone can be the regulated nervous system first until both can. So these 6 shifts show how the relational paradigm changes practice. First, the therapist embodies the work, like safety, consciousness, and empathy, because the therapist's presence influences the field. Second, Imago is conjoint. Both partners present to prevent uneven growth and triangulation and to observe the dyadic process directly. Third, Imago suspends judgment and avoids DSM style objectification. It also avoids collecting private partner reports outside sessions. Fourth, problems are reframed as symptoms of ruptured connection. Insight is useful, but connection is primary. Fifth, the work focuses on the space between. What happens between partners becomes the furniture inside them. Sixth, incompatibility is not a problem to eliminate. It's the ground for transformation when difference is held with structure rather than annihilated. The chapter is explicitly anti-medical model in orientation. It argues that diagnosis often locates the problem inside individuals and turns people into objects. Imago simplifies. Many symptoms are downstream of a central relational rupture, disconnection. This frame changes not only interventions, but language, moving away from wounds and healing toward challenges and transformations to fit the existential and relational worldview and to keep the locus of change in relationship. So now is the chapter's non-negotiables. First, safety first. Negativity produces anxiety. Anxiety triggers defenses, and defensiveness blocks connection. So safety is not an add-on, it's the condition for everything else. Second, focus on the relationship, not the partners. Imago shifts the therapist from expert fixer to facilitator of relational container. Third, move from vertical to horizontal. Replace monologues, judgment, and hierarchy with structured dialogue and equality. Fourth, make history history. Help couples see how past templates are being projected into the present so they stop mistaking partners for parents. Fifth, hold the tension of opposites. Validate both sides so the couple can move from either or to both and, tolerating ambiguity long enough to co create. Principle 6, promote otherness. Differentiation is required for connection. Validation is structured recognition that your partner's reality makes sense from where they stand without needing agreement. Principle 7, shift implicit to explicit. Unlanguaged material lives as present truth until it's safely spoken. Dialogue becomes the container that brings implicit memory into language and integration. Principle 8, facilitate the dream relationship. Vision orients the couple from unconscious reenactment to conscious co creation. Principle 9, help reclaim joy and pleasure. Many partners resist receiving pleasure due to socialization or fear. Naming that resistance becomes part of the work. Principle 10, collaborate on small behavioral changes. Imago proceeds slowly because big change triggers defenses. Small, doable shifts accumulate into transformation. So, if I had to compress the chapter into one message, it is to create the conditions for safe dialogue and keep returning the couple to the process. The therapist builds a holding environment that is safe and dialogical. The therapist teaches and coaches structure, and the therapist protects the space between from reenactments that escalate anxiety. As couples practice, connection restores regulation and reduces defensiveness. Differentiation increases, and hope becomes more available because the couple experiences themselves as as capable of repair. We end this chapter by shifting from worldview and orientation to what to do moment to moment. The big idea is that technique without stance becomes mechanical, and stance without technique becomes vague. These principles are meant to guide pacing and decisions in session. When to slow down, when to interpret, when to return to structure, and how to hold the container so the couple can experience something different, safe connection, rather than repeating the same fight in front of a witness. All right, so our final chapter of the week, removing negativity. So this is meant to be a practical chapter. The intervention is simple in concept. Remove all negativity. The rationale is systemic and neurobiological. Negativity ruptures connection, triggers anxiety, and activates defenses. Once survival becomes primary, thriving becomes impossible. And the timing is early, session 1, because safety is non-negotiable. Removing negativity is paired immediately with sender responsibility, a formal zero negativity pledge, and positive practices like affirmations. The point is to change a relational atmosphere before deeper work is even possible. Most couples don't arrive when conflict begins. They arrive after years of erosion. The chapter cites Gottman's observation that couples often wait 6 to 7 years after problems start before seeking counseling. By then, negativity is not occasional, it's ambient. It becomes the background music in the space between. The clinical implication is that we can't treat chronic negativity like a minor communication issue. Safety has to be rebuilt as the first order of business because without safety, vulnerability can't happen. And without vulnerability, relational transformation can't happen. Negativity doesn't stay local, it spreads. The chapter uses the concept of emotional contagion. One partner's anxiety, tension, and dysregulation is felt by the other, and the system escalates quickly. Imago also frames this poetically through quantum language, entanglement, to emphasize that relational fields transmit affect. Once contagion takes hold, couples move into a reactive dance, attack and defend, pursue and withdraw, what this chapter calls the turtle hailstorm dynamic. The punchline is if we want change, we must disrupt the transmission pathway, negativity itself. The definition is intentionally broad. Negativity is anything that one partner experiences as a put down, a word, gesture, tone, facial expression, interpretation, dismissal. A key clinical anchor here is experience trumps intent. A partner may not mean harm, but if it triggers anxiety and lands as a put down, it counts as negativity. That matters because many couples defend themselves with intent. I didn't mean it that way. Imago is saying the nervous system doesn't care what you meant, it responds to what it experienced. Negativity can be loud or quiet. Sometimes it's obvious, raised voice, sarcasm, or contempt. Sometimes it's covert, like helpful conversations that quietly devalue, like things like comments about clothing, competence, or routines. Over time, even mild negativity is cumulatively destructive. Partners walk on eggshells, stop risking, and stop sharing, and stop trying. The system then compensates through withdrawal, passive aggression, depression, seeking pleasure elsewhere, or escalating into counter put downs. The key is to treat subtle negativity as clinically significant, not harmless. This is an opportunity, like the Fran um, and Alicia vignette is a good teaching vignette. So Alicia is sharing a contribution. Fran mirrors but inserts a dig with my money, which contaminates mirroring and injects negativity. The therapist's move is not to shame Fran or litigate the issue, it's process focused. You may have something to say, save it for when you're sender. Mirror again without adding your thoughts. This is a template for how to respond to negativity in session, protect the container, return to structure, and keep safety intact. The chapter triangulates origins. First, evolution. Our brains are built to detect threat faster than safety. Second, neuroscience. The amygdala hijack means the reactive system fires before the reflective system. Third, relational development. Some symbiosis and failure to differentiate intensify the need to annihilate difference. And then the paradox. Negativity is a failed attempt to get needs met. It tries to negate the partner's behavior to remove the danger of need frustration, essentially grasping for connection through control or critique, but it guarantees the opposite outcome: anxiety, defenses, disconnection. Imago operationalizes the work in three linked practices. First is the pledge, an explicit commitment to remove anything that lands as a put down. Second is repair, because couples will fail. They need a fast reset protocol to restore connection before they habituate to hours or days of disconnection. Third is positive infusion. Whoops, sorry. Removing negativity creates space, but couples need something to put in that space. The space between focus trains partners to build the relational field, not just avoid harming it. The pledge is formal and explicit, ideally signed in session one. It includes a broad band, a broad ban on behaviors experienced as put downs, things like harsh tone, blame, shaming, contempt, eye rolls, cold stares, and aggressive gestures. The therapist doesn't impose it as a rule from above. We do psychoeducation and then facilitate a dialogue about commitment and feelings about the pledge. The chapter offers memorable gems to normalize the challenge. You can't control your first thought, but you can control your second. Think before you speak. Curiosity saves marriages. Thriving couples reconnect quickly. Prioritize the relationship. A small token helps to become real outside session. So, this is the chapter's main clinical payoff. Intent doesn't determine impact. Fran experiences herself as practical and honest about the watch. Alicia experiences it as my efforts and I don't matter, and it activates childhood material about being overlooked as a middle child. This is the model. Surface conflict is often a trigger. The deeper meaning is attachment and worth. The therapist's role is to structure the dialogue so the couple can move from rupture to understanding and empathy without using the session as a reenactment arena. The homework bridges office the homework bridges office structure and home chaos. Couples track the relationship, not each other. That distinction is critical. It shifts the focus from you messed up to our space between needs care. The rating system is simple. Smiley if no put down occurred, frowny if either partner experienced a put down, reset if a put down happened but they repaired. So the daily check in is short. This is not another long processing session. It's building awareness, accountability, and an early warning system. Integration is not optional. It's how zero negativity becomes a new default. The therapist opens sessions by reviewing the calendar and what the couple learned about patterns and triggers. We expect slip-ups because negativity is a long-trained defense. We celebrate small successes, validate the difficulty, and keep them paddling together. If a full 30-day pledge is too much, we can scale the commitment to until next session because the goal is stretching, not breaking. Then build toward longer sustained practice. This is one of the most clinically useful pieces in the chapter. When couples remove negativity, they remove an old defense system that their nervous system has relied on for a long time. Near the end of the first 30 days, some couples spike in anxiety because the familiar homeostasis is disrupted. If the therapist doesn't normalize this, couples often conclude this isn't working, and they either relapse hard or leave therapy. Our job is to name it as predictable nervous system response and help them stay the course until regulation restabilizes at a higher level. Because put downs will happen, repair has to be procedural. The first step is a signal, something agreed upon in advance. The purpose is neurobiological. It interrupts amygdala escalation and calls the thinking brain online. The signal can be serious or playful. Marshmallow works because it's hard to stay contemptuous while saying it. The key is mutual agreement and repetition until it becomes automatic. After the signal, couples choose a reconnecting pathway. Sometimes it's a quick behavior, something like an apology, a hug, or a small act. Sometimes they need a redo, maybe saying something like, would you resend that in a way that doesn't feel negative? Sometimes modeling helps. The receiver shows how they want it said so the sender can learn the delivery. For deeper pain, they move into structured imago dialogue around the put down. And in some cases, the pain points to a behavior change request. That wasn't covered in this chapter, but we can foreshadow that repair that may require new patterns, not just new words. A subtle problem. When couples stop being negative, they may also stop engaging. The relationship can feel strangely quiet, like losing oxygen they were used to breathing. When we pair zero negativity with positive rituals that retrain the nervous system, appreciations at bedtime, morning gratitude, or a daily 1 minute hug, the chapter cites the 5-to-1 principle. After a negative interaction, relationships do better when positives outweigh negatives significantly. The space between dialogue makes it explicit. We name what each partner contributes to the relationship field and link it to feeling states and childhood meanings, which deepens bonding. Removing negativity does more than be nicer. It changes physiology and structure. Safety increases, anxiety decreases, and curiosity becomes possible, which further supports regulation and integration. Symbiosis weakens because partners stop annihilating differences and start tolerating it. Responsibility shifts from me versus you to us protecting the space between. And importantly, the calendar data becomes diagnostic in a relational way. Patterns emerge. So when negativity spikes, what themes are touched, what childhood meanings were activated. That becomes the map for deeper dialogical work. All right, and finally, to close, define negativity broadly, remember experience trumps intent, and anticipate the negativity is automatic because the brain is built for threat detection and defense. The clinical pathway is consistent. Commit to zero negativity, practice repair quickly, and deliberately build positive exchanges so the relationship has new instructions for safety and pleasure. The goal is not just conflict reduction, it's restoring connection so the couple can thrive.